Hi, my name is Professor Cindy Bendshadler, and we're doing a workshop today on organization. So this is being taped for online presentation, but you guys are not in the video. So everybody should have the handout, and we're going to start off with a couple of questions. In the workshop, you're going to learn about why organization is important, why it's difficult, and then how to begin organizing through generating ideas, through filtering the ideas, deciding what really does belong in your essay, what doesn't belong in your essay, and then starting to put them into order, okay? And so we'll actually be doing a little bit of outlining, and so this is a participatory activity. You guys are going to tell me what you think belongs and doesn't belong and how to do the outline, okay? So to begin with, let's talk about why organization itself is important. A couple of things. One is that it makes it much easier for the reader to follow your paper, to follow your train of thought. If your ideas aren't in order, then it's confusing. And it's also less persuasive, right? If your reader doesn't really understand what you're saying. It also keeps the reader's attention. And part of that is, if you get confused by things, don't you tend to check out, right? If somebody's presenting something in a class and you have no idea what they mean, there's a tendency to go, let me think about my grocery list, or let me think about this relationship. You just start to think about other things because it's confusing. The other reason it keeps the reader's attention is that order gives your reader a feeling of building towards something important, right? That the best is yet to come, right? One of the reasons we tend not to start with the most important point is we don't want our reader to go, oh, the most important point's over, I don't have to pay attention anymore. We want our reader to feel like, oh, wait, there's more. And it gets even better. And this is even more important. And so you want to give your reader in the organization of your paper a sense of building importance, building toward your final thought. And that makes your reader continue to pay attention because you're teasing them in a sense. Maybe not in a malicious way, right? But you're giving them a sense that, kind of like on the news reports, that the really important story is coming. It's coming, wait for it. Keep watching, stay through the commercial breaks, stay through the report about the dog trapped in the house, or the cat trapped in the tree, because there's this really important story that's coming up. So you want to give your reader that sense. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay. Another thing is that effective arguments build logically. An example of this, some detail. When you're trying to really logically build an argument, especially for 1A and 1B classes, you want to think about it this way. You want your reader to accept a basic premise or assumption or idea, and then tell them, okay, if you have been persuaded by this point, then logically you must also accept this additional idea. Do you guys see how that works? So you start off by getting them to accept certain ideas, and then you build off of that. Similarly, you start off with answering your reader's objections. And you say, hey, if you've accepted my responses to your questions and objections, then surely you must accept my point. And so you want to think about your reader and how to persuade your reader in terms of organizing. So the next question, though, is, we know why it's important, but why is it so difficult? And so I thought I'd start off with ideas from you guys. You're here, so clearly you don't think organization's the easiest thing in the world. What makes it hard? Give you some time to answer.
Trying to figure out what the most important thing is.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so you're sorting through and you're like, well, is this more important or is this more important? I don't know.
You've got three really good points. Sometimes it's hard to come up with an emphatic order.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
You have too many ideas and you don't know which one is important.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great point. And sometimes they're all equally important, right? So you can't always do an emphatic order. It takes a lot of critical thinking. And I think sometimes there are multiple correct orders as long as you have a reason behind them. So you may have 3 really important ideas, and you could put them in the order of ABC or BCA or CBA or whatever order you choose, as long as you know why you're putting it in that order. And so maybe emphatic order doesn't always work, right? Maybe there isn't a most important point. As a little side note, one of the things I tell people a lot of times is if you have 2 ideas that are really, really similar, you want to put them side by side. You want to put them next to each other. And the reason for that is if they're separated, they look like you're repeating the same idea. If you put them next to each other, the differences and similarities become clearer. And this is a kind of goofy way of thinking about it, but if you have 2 green pieces of paper, I mean, this is one kind of green, but if we had another piece of paper that was just a slightly darker shade of green, if I put one of them on one side of the room and I taped the other one to the other side of the room, would it be really obvious that they're different shades? Your eyes, as you go from this side of the room to this side of the room, they look like they're the same color. You put them next to each other, and the differences become more apparent. And you see, oh, I'm going from this shade of green to this slightly different shade of green. It really is a different idea now that I'm looking at them right next to each other. Right? These aren't the same 2 greens. These aren't the same 2 blues. So if you have 2 ideas that are really closely related, you want to make sure to put them next to each other. And that's an important idea to keep in mind, as well as which idea is more important, which idea is less important. Okay, so there are lots of things that you want to think about. You want to look at ideas that are closely related.
So, okay, like say you're showing the differences in 2 similar things, and you're putting it in a paragraph.
Yes.
The structure of the paragraph should go, first thing, well, of course, topic sentence, introduces both ideas.
Right.
And then the first idea you talked about, you introduced that. Second idea, introduce that, and then analysis?
It depends on the kind of assignment. If you're thinking about comparison contrast, that sounds like, you said if you're comparing 2 things that are similar in one paragraph, you actually have 2 different ways of organizing them. And I'll take a break to talk about this really quickly now, and then we'll continue to move on. One is called point by point. I'm shortening that. And so if you had apples and oranges, you might say something like taste. And then you would go over apples. And then you would go over oranges and how they taste. And then you might have nutrition. And then you would do apples and oranges. And then you would go on, right? And that's called point by point. The other one is called block format, or another term I've heard is one side at a time. And this one you would do apples, and you would talk about taste, nutrition. Maybe our third one is convenience, because I like oranges more, but they're not as convenient as apples, right? And then I would have oranges. And I would do the same thing, taste, nutrition, convenience. And I'd keep the same order, but you can actually do either. And that's an example of what I was saying earlier, that often there's more than one right way to organize. The point is you need to have an idea behind how you're organizing it. You need to have a logic. It can't just be random. I thought of this first and then I thought of that. I might go over taste first because that's the most obvious, right? Nutrition is important, but it's less obvious. Convenience, I might put last, but if I think it's a little bit more obvious, maybe I'll put that second. You know what I mean? So that would be going from most obvious to least obvious. So it's a kind of emphatic order, even though I'm not going from least important to most important. I still have a reason for why I'm putting things in a particular order. If I were doing something more descriptive, I might go from the appearance of the skin into the texture when you're biting in, and then the taste, because that's chronological, right? So whatever order you choose, you have to have a reason, and that's the most important thing. But I think you guys are right. You're getting at the heart of the issue, which is sometimes it's hard to tell what's the most important thing. Sometimes it's hard to tell how to sort through those ideas and put them in, give a logic. I have a couple of other reasons why it's difficult. When we think, do we think in an organized fashion? It's sort of random neural firings, right? I get this idea and then I get this idea. We don't think in a linear, orderly fashion. My first idea is not necessarily my best. My last idea isn't necessarily my best. They just come in whatever order they happen to occur to us, and it's kind of random. And so it takes another layer of critical thinking to go from that sort of chaos of initial ideas into a logical order. A second reason that organization is difficult is once we've got stuff on paper, we resist change. We go, it's on paper this way. I don't want to rethink it. I don't want to have to, reorganize this and change everything. So once it's written down, we tend to treat our paragraphs or our essays as if they're in stone, and we don't want to shift. And we have to get over that. You have to think, this is a work in progress. This can shift. I can move things around in my essay, and it might work a lot better that way. The third reason organization can be really difficult is if we don't know what we want to prove. Right. So an example of this might be in comparison, because I think you brought up that idea of comparing two ideas. If I don't really know what I want to prove about the differences between apples and oranges, and I love using that because people say you can't compare them, and of course you can compare apples and oranges, right? I might want to have a point, and my point might be, what should I choose as a snack? And if that's my point, convenience might actually be the most important thing to me, right? Because for a snack on the go, right? So I like oranges better. I love the taste of them. Apples aren't my favorite fruit in the world, but I eat them a lot. Not because I'm a teacher. Apple for the teacher, right? Yeah. But because I can take my apple and eat it while on the way to class, or on the way to the writing center, or on the way back. And I've gotten to the point where I eat the seeds too. And so sometimes all that's left is a stem, and I can easily throw that away, and even the core. But can you imagine trying to eat an orange as you're walking? I mean, you get your hands all sticky, you have the peel, you can't, and so you have to hold the peel until you get near a trash can. You need to wash your hands or have something to clean them. So convenience would be really the most important thing if that's my purpose. So getting a really clear sense of what you want to prove will help you figure out how to organize, right? If I wanted to talk about which fruit is better for your general health, I might make a different choice. Or maybe I would still say apples are better, but I would end with nutrition, right? Instead of with convenience. And I might not even include convenience as a point in that case. So sometimes when we're first writing, we don't necessarily have a complete idea of where we want to go, of what our end goal is, or our end game, right? What am I aiming for? So if you can take some time, if you're having trouble with organizing, I encourage you to take a step back from your essay and ask yourself, what am I really trying to prove? What is my end goal for this paper? What do I want my reader to get out of this? And that can actually help you really figure out what's the most important idea, because your end game will determine that. Okay. So let's start talking about how to begin organizing. Okay. You can't organize until you have something to work with. I'll have students come up to me sometimes at the Writing Center, and they'll sit down with me and say, I don't know how to organize my research paper. And I'll say, great, well, what's your topic? And they're not even sure about their topic quite yet, or they haven't done research yet. And that's always really bad when the research paper's due the next week, but, or the next day. I've had that happen. I have to write a research paper for tomorrow. I think my topic is this, but I haven't researched it yet. How do I organize? I've had that question. And the first thing is, you don't organize, right? If you're trying to organize your taxes and your paperwork, you need to gather all your paperwork first, right? And then you start to put it in piles, and you decide what to throw away and what to keep and what to shred, right? But you don't start organizing your paperwork until there's paperwork there, right? Same thing. You don't sort your laundry until you have that basket of dirty laundry. Then you start putting it into clothing, into color piles, right? Then you start sorting the laundry. So the first thing to do is generate your ideas. So what are some techniques that you guys already know about how to generate ideas? Clustering. And clustering is wonderful. So that's where you start with a circle in the center. You have your general topic, and you move outward, and you become more specific. Okay. So clustering is one. What's another? Free writing. I love free writing. And part of it is because I am not a linear thinker. I like just sort of spilling my guts onto the paper. And then I go through sometimes, and you can highlight things that you like from your free write or circle things that you like. What are some other techniques? Yeah. Listing or brainstorming. Just list them. Right? And they don't have to be complete sentences, but you just get lots and lots of ideas. Any other techniques you know of? These are the three main ones that get taught, but there are many, many others. Like, have you guys ever done the reporter's questions? Where you say who, where, what, why, when, how. That's usually good if you're talking about an event, right? It depends on the kind of paper you're doing. There are lots and lots of ways you can do this, but you want to pick a technique that either works really well for the paper or that you really feel comfortable with, and get as many ideas as possible. And give yourself enough time on here to get a lot of ideas to organize. A lot of times on clustering, I'll see clusters that are really short, or lists where they only have maybe 5 items. Doesn't give you a lot to organize. Doesn't give you a lot to work with. So you really want to push that pre-writing part. After you've generated the ideas, then you need to filter them. Okay. If you can kind of think of it as like a strainer, right? You pour through the strainer and you get rid of whatever you don't want, right? And then the stuff that you do want remains in the strainer. That's the kind of, or the colander, right? The pasta doesn't go through the holes, but the water does. You want to figure out what to include, and of your brainstorm or your cluster or your free writing, what do you not want to include? That idea of highlighting things in your free write that you liked, that's part of filtering, right? You don't filter when you're generating ideas. You want to get as many ideas as possible. How many of you have ever seen somebody pan for gold? Have you ever seen that? Right, so they take something and they scoop up a whole bunch of mud and water, and then they go, yeah. And what stays in the pan? The gold. right? And they try to sift out everything else. That's what's happening with filtering. You're trying to, the generating is scooping up a lot of muck, a lot of stuff that you're going to end up discarding. But you won't get the gold unless you get a lot of muck too. And usually there's more muck than gold.
So, is filtering like using a table? Like,
What do you mean by using a table? I'm not sure.
If you have, like, say you're doing a comparison contrast.
Yes.
And you put the two different things that you're comparing.
Oh, like a chart, a comparison chart?
You make, like, you have your topics.
Yeah.
On the top here, and then you just put them in columns for whatever your clustered ideas fit into. Is that filtering?
It can be filtering. If you begin with doing the comparison chart, it may also be generating ideas. But if you began with listing or free writing and clustering, so you already have all your ideas, and then when you're creating that chart, and just to give you guys, if you haven't ever seen this, it would be something like this, where if we had apples and oranges again, A would be for apples, O is for oranges, and I might say taste here. Do you guys see how this is going to work? And then nutrition, and then convenience, and so on. And then I would fill in that chart. This can be a really good filtering device. Sometimes people use it when they're still generating ideas. The filtering then, if you're still generating ideas, the filtering might be going through and saying, you know what, I don't really want to talk about convenience. I'm really focused on something else. And so you would cut out things that maybe you decided don't really belong. In order to filter, and I think this is partly what you guys were talking about earlier, it's partly ordering, but it's partly filtering too, is you need to have some sense of your thesis statement or your topic sentence, or even your topic sentences plural, right? You need to have a sense, again, of what is the point that you want to prove. Once you have that, you know what's going to be included and what's not. Your topic sentence or your thesis is kind of like that pan that you use to sift everything out, right? So you go through all of the ideas you've generated and you say, well, if I want to talk about which one is the better snack at home, convenience isn't such a big issue. So I want to focus in on taste and nutrition, but I'm not really going to focus in on convenience because at home it's not that big of a deal. It's not so important. You know, if I'm talking about a snack for school, I would include this. So I cross it out because it's not so important. But I need to know that I'm evaluating, and I'm evaluating for a snack at home. So the more specific it is, the more sense you have of your thesis and topic sentence, the better your ability to filter is. Now here's one caveat. Do you guys always have the perfect thesis right as you're writing your rough draft? No? Really? No. One of the things that you'll find is that you write your rough draft, you have a tentative thesis or a tentative topic sentence, depending on whether you're writing a paragraph or an essay. And you filter, but as you're writing your essay, your ideas develop. Your sense of purpose increases, right? A lot of times, a better thesis pops up while you're writing your concluding paragraph. Have you found that? You have this sort of weak thesis, and you're like, I don't really like my thesis, and you write your conclusion, and in your conclusion is the perfect thesis statement. Then you grab it from your conclusion, and you put it up in your introduction, and you rewrite your conclusion a little bit. What you have to do is filter again. And I mean, we do that in real life, right? Like if you're doing laundry, you might do color first, but then you might do hot and cold wash after, right? If you're doing your paper sorting, you might sort first in terms of papers that you know, like here are all of my bank statements, here are all of my credit card statements, here, you know, And then you might go through a second time going, what can I throw away? What's old enough? You know, oh, these are from 2006. Maybe I should shred these. Maybe I don't need to keep them anymore in my poor filing cabinet, you know. And so we can go through and filter multiple times. So be aware that this is sometimes this is a process you might do more than once. Make sense? Okay. Once you've filtered, now you're ready to think about order. And this is the sorting through once you've decided, these are all the things I want to include. Now how do I group them? Lots and lots of ways to group them. One might be time. What happened first, second, third, last? Chronological order. It might be space, especially if you're doing a description, right? That might be in the order of space. If you're writing classification, certainly you want to divide things into parts or put them into groups. You might look at causes and effects, the reasons for something, the results of something. You might sort it into similarities and differences. You might sort it into ideas or principles, concepts, and then the examples of each of those concepts, right? So more general, more specific, maybe more abstract, more concrete. You might sort things into arguments for or against. You might do, and you probably will do, combinations of these. The more complex you're writing, the more that you're going to use multiple means of organizing and ordering. Okay. For instance, if you were doing a comparison, you might also be describing in your comparison. Or if you're comparing ideas, you might also be giving examples of each idea. And in your comparison, you may be arguing too. So sometimes you're doing multiple things, and you want to be aware of that. Okay. So we're going to do an activity. So if you go back to your green sheet, sure, take both of those. Okay. If you look at the thing that says A, general topic, negative aspects of movie theaters. I'm going to go ahead and stop the PowerPoint presentation for a moment, and I'll pull up a copy of this and put it up here. This is now your turn to do some work. You didn't think you had to work today, did you? Look at that. I know. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is filter, and then we'll think about ordering after we've filtered. So the first thing we want to do is cross off anything that seems off topic, okay, or unimportant. So if we're talking about negative aspects of movie theaters, let's go through, and you guys are going to tell me, and I'm going to delete anything that you think doesn't belong, okay? And obviously, the more sense we have of where we're going with this, the more we can filter out. But let's start off with things that are clearly not related. So traffic is bad between my house and the theater. Does that belong or not belong? What's that?
It's negative, so it has to be.
It's negative, right? I don't necessarily want to drive to the theater, so we can leave that. What about noisy patrons? That's also negative. What about don't want to run into Jeremy? It's a negative aspect of a movie theater, but it's pretty specific to one person, right? So we might decide, let's get rid of that, because only the author wants to avoid Jeremy. Nobody else cares. What about it's hard to be on a diet in a movie theater?
It is hard.
Yeah, so we'll leave that. Fun time with friends.
Yeah, that's negative.
That's positive, yeah. How about kids running in the aisles? That's negative, okay. I'm crowded into seats between strangers who push me off of armrests. That's pretty negative. That's like airplanes too, right? But what about not enough parking? That's kind of negative, right, if you have to keep circling. The parking lot needs to be expanded.
Not at all. Doesn't give you long.
Yeah, or it's actually kind of related to the idea before, right? So it's almost repetitive there. How about too many previews? That's pretty negative, yeah. Can't pause or fast forward a movie? Like if you need to go to the bathroom or something like that, you know, you just paid, what, $8, $10, and now you're missing part of it. Okay, so that's pretty negative. Long lines? High ticket prices? Too many temptations at snack stand? Negative. Now, by the way, does that sound similar to something else?
Yes.
Hard to be on a diet. So why don't we go ahead and move, yeah, let's move this one up to hard to be on a diet. Commercials for food on the screen.
That's hard, that's
Yeah. So let's move that up here. What about can prepare healthy snacks for myself at home? It's not negative, right? It's a way of dealing with the fatty foods at the theater, but it's kind of off topic. It seems, and by the way, it seems like it's on topic, right? Because you think, oh, it has to do with eating healthy at the theater. But that's not our purpose. Our purpose is to talk about why we don't like the movie theater, not how to make the movie theater healthy. So we'll go ahead and delete that too. How about tubs of popcorn with butter?
It's part of the diet, though.
It could be part of the diet one, so we'll decide. Huge chocolate bars and candy has always been my downfall. Do you guys see how those relate too?
All of these are part of the diet.
Yeah.
Be on diet.
Now we may decide later on, I want to point out, we may decide later on, ooh, we don't want to have that much about food, right? But we can do that later. The filtering and sorting process, we can go through it a couple times. Okay. What about the movie may be sold out? That's pretty negative, yeah. How about people who've seen the movie before talk along with the actors and give away plot twists? That's pretty bad. People coughing and sneezing? Yeah. Icky stuff on the floor? Negative, right? Teenagers yelling and showing off?
It is negative if you are not a teenager.
That's right. You know what? And that's a good point too, is your perspective affects what you think relates and doesn't, right? If you're a teenager, you might be like, yeah, the movie theater is awesome. We can go and yell and, you know. Okay. What about discounts on Tuesday evenings? Yeah, that doesn't belong there. That's positive. Okay. So we already realized that, and I'm going to go ahead and color code this a little bit. We know that there's all this stuff about diet, so I'm going to make that all yellow. What are some other things that seem related to each other? Like the traffic. Is there anything else related to traffic or driving or cars? Yeah, that seems good. Yeah. Yeah. Now there's some other stuff that happens before before you even get in to watch the movie. What are some other issues related to that? Long lines, high ticket, and the movie may be sold out. So let's bring those up too. I know it's hard to do that on the hard copy. It's the nice thing about computers. So I'm going to put this, let's make this green. And we'll make this one red. Okay. I'm going to move noisy patrons down to kids running in the aisles. Do you guys see that? How those relate? Are there any other things that sound like they're related to noisy patrons? Oh, yeah. People coughing and sneezing, that's loud.
What about the teenage yelling?
Oh, definitely. So we'll put that there. Anything else having to do with loud people? Good. So we're going to make that another color. And make this one blue. Okay. What about the rest of this? Do these relate to anything else that you see? Or are these kind of on their own?
The credits into seats.
Mm-hmm.
Go with the kids running around, maybe.
Okay, because even though it's not about noise, it's about your kind of discomfort. Okay, that makes sense. So let's go ahead and, so we're kind of broadening that category to be general discomfort in the theater. What about icky stuff on the floor? It's discomfort. It's not about people in this case, so it's slightly different, but we'll put it close, maybe not make it blue. Too many previews and the can't pause and fast forward. This part, maybe those are kind of related too, right? So we'll put those together with gray. How about that? Icky stuff on the floor is the one that's probably the least connected to anything else. Do you guys see what I mean? Does it mean you're not going to include it? No, but it certainly isn't your most important point, right? So if you include it, but you might decide not to include it because it doesn't tie in. Whereas you have so much more to say about some of these other issues, especially, what are the two biggest issues? What's that? Noise? Is that what you said? Yeah, noise, definitely. Food.
Yeah.
So one of the things that becomes clear from looking at this, now, if you were writing about it, you might have very different detail, right? But it seems clear, like, for this author, that the issues that are the biggest have to do with the temptation to eat badly and really not liking the patrons, not liking the other people in the theater. So if we were helping this person organize, okay, now obviously if it's your own essay or paragraph, you might have a whole set of other details, right? But if you were helping someone else, when somebody comes to me at the Writing Center, what I don't want to do is tell them what to write. I want to work with their ideas, right? So looking at this, I would think, oh, okay, maybe these are going to be your two main things, and we want to end with those. If we have other detail included, we probably want to have the minor details closer to the beginning, because you have so much more to say about these two things. Of those two, we could put it in either order. If I'm trying to diet and lose weight, maybe this is the thing I end with. Because for me personally, maybe this is the most important. I have a feeling that for most of us, this part would be the most important, because we went to see a movie, and if the movie's interrupted constantly by loud people and rude people, and you're uncomfortable, maybe that part would be the more important. And so I would probably personally end on this note. Does that make sense? Okay. Now you could also decide at this point that you don't really want to talk about the dieting. And it's your choice. There's not a right or wrong answer. You just have to think about, what do you want to prove? So I might decide, even though I have a lot to say about food, maybe that's just too personal. Maybe I'm trying to write something to an audience that's mixed, right? And I want to tell people generally why it's better to rent a movie from Netflix. I was about to say Blockbuster, but I never go to Blockbuster anymore. I always get Netflix, right? So why it's better to use Netflix rather than go to the theater. If my purpose is simply to talk about my own choice, I'm going to include the food. But if I'm talking to a larger audience and I want to persuade people, I'm not going to really talk about the food, because if you're not on a diet, it's not that convincing, right? If you're like, no, I go to the movie theater because they have the popcorn, right? Or because they have gelato at the local theater now. I'm like, ooh, cinnamon gelato. That's pretty exciting. Let's go to the movies. Right. So let's say we were trying to, as I'm narrowing down what I want to do with a paper, I don't want to talk about my personal choice. I want to tell people why they shouldn't go to the theaters. I'm going to take this out, as much as I have a lot to say about it. And now at this point, it's probably a paragraph, not an essay, right? Because I've taken so much out. The icky stuff on the floor, I have two choices. I can leave it in, or I might want to give some other detail about the physical surroundings. So one of the things that organizing also helps you do is it helps you see where you need more detail. So what are some other things about the theater, the physical environment of the theater?
Ratty chairs.
Ratty chairs, yeah. Like, do I really want to sit in this chair? They don't look very clean, maybe. The other thing is they may not be that comfortable, and they squeak.
You can also say that the kids running around are throwing things on the floor, or, dropping the sodas and things like that, making it.
Sure, good.
Popcorn on the floor.
Popcorn on the floor, well, that's part of the icky stuff, yeah, but you could give that as a detail.
Maybe it's not safe. It has safety issues.
Safety issues.
Bad
Good.
lighting.
Bad lighting, good. Any other things about the physical environment of the theater?
Smell.
The
Smell.
smell.
I wouldn't have thought of that one, but did you see the reaction? They're like, oh, yeah. Whoa. So that would probably be a good one. Now, we don't have to include it, but I would think, looking at that icky stuff on the floor, realizing that there's nothing else that relates to it, I have two choices. Get rid of it or add related detail. Now, just for the purposes of this activity, I'm going to get rid of it. Okay. Now let's think about ordering. So you guys see we've filtered, right? The ideas were already generated for us. We've filtered a lot. We only have about half of what we had initially. And we've sorted things into groups, but now we want to think about order. So we could certainly do some chronological order here. And it's already kind of there, right? Yeah. There's one thing that probably could be moved. I'm going to make this last part a little lighter. I think that too many previews is too dark. There we go. Now we can see that better. This first part, traffic is bad between my house and theater. That's certainly the first irritating thing, right? Not enough parking is the next bad thing. Then we have long lines. That makes sense. That's still chronological, right? Because once you park, now you need to get in line. Then you have to pay the high ticket prices. Should we put the movie maybe sold out before or after the ticket prices? Okay, so let's put, and why before?
Because if it's sold out, you're not buying a ticket.
Exactly. Good. So there's a good logic there. Okay. When we look at noisy patrons and we look at people who've seen the movie before, that's an example, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and indent that. Let me go back to home, and I'm going to indent that because that's kind of or maybe even let's put a bullet point here. Okay. Because that's an example of a noisy patron. People coughing and sneezing, that's also an example. Teenagers yelling and shouting and kids running in the aisles, that's also an example, right? So maybe here, I'm going to add noisy and rude patrons. And then I can put the crowded in there too. Does that make sense? Because now I'm not talking about just noisy. What order would you put these in?
Actually, I was looking at like being crowded in with a seat.
Uh-huh.
You could almost put that at the top,
Sure.
That's the first one.
and
Sitting down.
but then even before that, like the too many previews.
Yeah.
Those things, in between the noisy and rude.
Like right up here?
Yeah, because they're more of what's going on as you're trying to get settled.
Oh,
what's going on
right.
after you're settled and trying to watch the movie.
So would you put the crowded into seats first or keep it where it is?
Yeah, 'cause that's like part of getting the,
Getting settled?
yeah.
Okay, sure. So do we want to put that after too many previews or after can't pause?
Oh, can't pause would probably maybe go down further.
Down further? Okay. Okay. So maybe we can, and we could put that at the end, and one of the reasons we could, it almost could be our concluding idea, right? Because we could say, hey, you know, there are all these noisy people. Well, if something happens at home, right, if the phone rings, if there's an interruption at home, what do? Pause, right?
Yes.
And you can rewind, and you can, right? And so one of the things that you could do is you could conclude with, you know, if I were able to pause and rewind and fast forward, then maybe these interruptions from other patrons wouldn't be so annoying. But because I can't, it ruins my enjoyment of the movie. Therefore, I'd rather stay at home, you know. So that would certainly work to do that. And there are multiple ways to do this. So we have too many previews. So we're going to go ahead and make this kind of a settling in. So we have trying to get to the theater, buying the tickets, and then we have before the movie even starts, just trying to get settled in, and then during the movie. That's a really good logic. Now, looking within the noisy and rude patrons, let's try to do emphatic order. What do you think is the least rude? Yeah, they're not really trying to be rude. It's just it's annoying, but you know, it's not like they're being intentionally obnoxious. Okay. What about after that?
Kids running around you, probably.
Okay. Because they, you know, it doesn't say that they're yelling. They're just, you know, if you think about, especially like a 4-year-old, you know, or a 3-year-old toddling around, they're not necessarily being super loud, but you're kind of worried about them. Which one do you think is the worst?
Giving away the plot.
Okay, so maybe we'll end with that one.
Everything else is annoying, but that just kind of ruins the movie.
Right. Don't tell me when I'm watching Sixth Sense that the psychiatrist is actually dead, right? Don't tell us that. That just ruined the whole, you know. So do you guys see how many changes we made? And we're really thinking through it. Could we choose a different order? Yes. The point is to have the logic. Okay. All right. We're going to do this one more time. Okay. This is because I want us to practice it, and I think that this is the most important thing. Before we do, I want to, just to make sure we have time for it, I do want to return us to the PowerPoint briefly and talk about outlining. Okay. So once you have those groupings that we did, we already started doing this. We want to think about how to order them, and we looked at time order, emphatic, comparisons. And do you remember we already talked about one side at a time or point by point if you're comparing? If you're doing an argument, one of the ways that you might decide to organize your argument is to give the background of an issue. So if you were talking about the death penalty, you might give the background of the death penalty. Then you might talk about the other side. What does your opposing view believe, right? People who have a different view than you. Because you want to show your reader right away that you understand the other side. You don't agree with the other side, but you understand them. And how many of you are doing 1A, 1B? Can I see? Oh, excellent. Okay. For you in particular, think about it this way. If you don't let your reader know that you understand the other side, they're less willing to listen to you. So you start off showing the other side. You make some concessions. right? Just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean that you have to disagree with absolutely everything they say. So if you're talking about the death penalty, let's say you want to keep it. You think the death penalty should not be abolished, it should remain legal. As you're explaining the other side, you might say, it's true that the death penalty has not been racially equitable, right? That certain racial groups are executed more often than other racial groups, or economic groups too, right? Because richer people have better lawyers, something like that, right? You might concede to that. It's a well-documented fact. You don't have to disagree with that. But then you would go ahead and also do rebuttals. So your rebuttal might be, but that doesn't mean that we have to get rid of the death penalty. It means we have to fix the problems with the system. We need to make it equitable, right? So you actually can convince your reader more if you're willing to make some concessions rather than disagree. I won't listen to you. It seems childish, right? If you won't do that. If you're in an argument and somebody goes, I won't listen to you, I'm not listening, you're not going to listen to them. That's why you want to show that you are listening to the other side, that you will grant them logical points on their side. But then you go on to give your side and evidence supporting your side. Your reasoning, your evidence in support of that. Okay? And what you've done is you've established common ground, you've established that you're fair, and you've helped your reader to be willing to listen to you. So these are some things you might think about if you're arguing. The rule of thumb is to consider whom? Your reader, yeah. That's the person you're talking to. And it depends on who your reader is. So here's some thoughts for reading, for your reader. What is necessary background information? Okay. If you are writing about horseback riding, are you writing for a general audience that doesn't know anything about horses? Or are you writing to an audience that already knows quite a bit? If you're writing for the Equestrian Weekly newsletter, you're going to assume that your reader already knows quite a lot and you won't have to define certain terms. And you might use technical terms more readily. If you're writing to a general audience, you don't assume that they know the same amount. And so you give more information. Another thing that you want to think about is what questions or objections might distract the reader if you don't handle them right away. Sometimes I'm reading a paper and I'll have a question or an objection. And it's there in front of my mind the whole time I'm reading the paper. And the writer gets to it, but not until the end. Have I really fully paid attention to the essay? Because I'm constantly thinking, but what about, are they going to address? So if you think your reader's going to have a question or objection, deal with it early. And once you've dealt with it, then you have your reader's attention. And you can keep going. So that's another thing to think about. And then the last one, and we've already kind of talked about this, is where are you leading your reader? What's your end goal, or what's your end game? Are you trying to persuade your reader? Are you trying to entertain? Are you trying to inform? What specifically are you trying to persuade your reader to do? What do you want your reader to believe or to think or to feel at the end of this essay? That's going to help you make those decisions. And so again, if you're having trouble with organization, step back and think, what's my purpose and who's my reader? And those will really help. Okay. Once you've thought about those things, then you want to consider outlining. And I wanted to ask really quickly, how many of you outline regularly? 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 of you. I used to hate outlining. I really hate outlining. And when I had to do an outline, and this is off the record even though it's on the video, I used to write the paper and then do the outline. You've done it too. Because I didn't get it. I didn't understand, because the kind of writer that I was is I would spend about 2 hours on my introductory paragraph, and the whole time I was kind of letting the ideas percolate and work in my mind, and then I'd get it. I'd know what I'd want to write, and I'd write that intro, and then things would just sort of flow. And my ideas would develop as I was writing. I couldn't just write an outline, and I didn't know what I wanted to say until I started writing. A couple of things have changed my mind. One is that I learned that sometimes outlining is what you do after you have a really rough draft. You have a really rough draft, you've gotten your ideas out on paper, you may have done some pre-writing before, but the outlining is a technique for revision at times. Now again, this depends on your style as a writer, right? There are people who cannot write their paper until their intro is done. There are other people who can't write their intro until their paper is done. That's yours. So it's okay. Sometimes outlining, if you don't feel great with that, try outlining between your rough and maybe final draft. You might have multiple rough drafts, right? So you might have a really rough draft, an outline, and then a more polished rough draft, and then another more polished one, and then so on. So don't feel like it has to absolutely come before you write your paper. Another thing that taught me to appreciate outlines is writing longer papers. And this, I'm particularly talking to my 1A and 1B students in here. When you write an 8 to 10 page, or a 10 to 12, or a 15 or a 20 page paper, or 30, or longer, you must outline. You cannot write sort of directionlessly, right? You can't just be in the void of, I don't know where I'm going with this. One of the great things with research papers is they actually become much easier if you outline and do a detailed outline. Now, you're not necessarily outlining every single paragraph, but you could get that intense. But you want to at least know every section of your paper, and then you can think about each section as like a miniature paper. So if you're doing a problem solution paper for a research paper, your first section might be the causes of the problem. Your second section might be the effects of the problem. Or you could reverse it. You could do, here's this terrible problem, look at all of its effects. What caused it? And you get into the causes. Then you might look at solutions that have been tried. And you might evaluate each attempted solution. And then in the end, you might present the solution that you think works the best. Do you guys see how that works? But an outline helps you to see, oh, I can really break this down. So this 10-page paper is really 5 2-page papers, or something like that, right? Or maybe a one 1-page paper, 2 pages, and there's a 3 or 4-page paper in there. So outlining is absolutely one of the best things you can do for longer papers. My senior year of college, I had to write a senior thesis, and that was about 90 pages. Okay? So think about it that way too, right? If you have a 90-page paper, whew, that's a lot. Okay? You have to outline. The third thing that I've learned is that for official forms or memos, things for work, I have to outline. It might be just a scratch outline, but what you want to be able to do is think, what are the 3 points I really need to hit here? If I'm doing an application for transfer to UCR or to UC Berkeley or Cal State San Bernardino, they want you to get a lot of information in a short space. Outlining will help you remember, make sure you hit all of the points they've asked you to hit. Okay, so it does have some important points. There are scratch outlines where all you do is kind of what we did earlier. I'm going to just toggle back over there. When we did this is kind of a scratch outline. Does that make sense? It's in order, but does it tell you what's the most important? Yeah, it just tells you what order you want to hit it in. A scratch outline might also have a topic sentence at the beginning. We don't have that, or a thesis statement. A more formal outline will look like this, where your Roman numeral 1 is the main topic of a section. And then you have that subtopic as A, and the subtopic as B. And then the more detailed you get, the further you go to the left. Wait, no, to the right. I had to reverse. So the further you are to the left, the more general and also the more important. The further you go to the right, the more specific supporting detail you're giving. And so, especially for doing a research paper, I would start getting into something more like this. Okay. If you're doing a paragraph, I think typically a scratch outline is plenty. Okay. I was going to have us do that the second activity on sorting and filtering, but I think we're getting close to the end of our time. If you look at it on your paper, it's the legalization of drugs. So this is more an argument, right? And one of the things you would have to do if you were looking at this, and maybe this is just something for you to think about. We won't go through the whole activity. Is as you look through, you might want to decide, am I arguing for or against legalizing drugs, right? So I would probably want to sort things into arguments for and arguments against. I might also want to sort it into the effects, the potential effects of legalizing drugs, whether they're negative or positive, right? I might want to pull some things into a section on background. Remember when I said we do arguments? Sometimes you need to give some background. So if I were sorting through this and filtering through it, I would probably want to keep those kinds of things in mind. Does that make sense? Oh, that you'd also want to think about background. Yeah, like what information is not really an argument for or against, it's just background, right? This is the history of the drug war so far. This is this is why the issue's coming up. Maybe there's a proposition that's going through, that's going to be voted on. That might be part of your background information.
Like the first one right there, drugs are legal in some countries and illegal in others.
Right, and that would be background. That's not really an argument for or against, is it? And it's not really a cause-effect thing. It's just, in Amsterdam, in Holland, drugs are legal, right? In the United States, marijuana and other drugs are illegal.
So like current events qualify as background?
Yeah. Now, they could also be supporting. So what you have to think about is this supporting either side, or is this simply giving some sort of neutral background information? The drugs are legal in some countries and illegal in others is more neutral background information. And if there's a proposition on the books, right, that we're going to vote to legalize marijuana or not legalize marijuana, or medical marijuana, we could make it even more specific, but this is more general, right? That might be part of, you're not arguing for or against it yet, you're just saying, we're going to vote on this, right? This decision is before you. We have to think about it as a citizen, okay? So any questions before we end about organizing? Okay, well, thank you guys so much, and thank you for your participation.